Welcome to Leveling the Playing Field, creating equity by closing the information gap. I firmly believe in the adage that while talent is equally distributed, opportunity is not. And that inequity persists in large part because many of us live in information deserts. That's what this show is all about. Bridging that vast information gap by sharing the inside scoop, the secrets to success, practical strategies and tips from a wide range of professional rock stars who've been in those rooms and reached enviable heights. Working hard is great. It's important. It's necessary, but too often not sufficient. It's time to level the playing field. Hi there. I am so excited. Welcome, Winnie. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me. I'm extremely excited.
We are so excited, and I'm really excited to have everybody join from wherever you are. Please tell us in the chat where you are joining from. And I just feel like we don't celebrate ourselves enough. So brag on yourself. Put something in the chat, something that you're proud of, an accomplishment maybe over the past week or the past few weeks. So just let us know in the chat. We're just really, really glad to have everybody here today. I'm Dana Brownlee, and I'm extra happy to invite or to welcome my guest today, Miss Winnie Elizabeth Thompson, public relations strategist extraordinaire. Welcome, Winnie.
Thank you for having me. I just want to say the last live that I watched of yours, I was proud of preparing my dinner in the morning, and someone in the comments said that I would appreciate that, and I really did. As a mom of two, I really appreciated having that prep done.
Well, I have been there and done that, so I completely can relate. And so, yeah, just keep telling us where you're joining from. Welcome from Cincinnati, and this person's proud of the progress with their new business venture. And this is actually perfect. If you're an entrepreneur, you're an author, you're doing amazing work out in the corporate world. Everybody needs publicity. And so,
Yeah.
what I found, I mean, I've been an entrepreneur for 20 years, it was just not a world I was in any way familiar with. And so, it was hard for me to figure that out. And so, I actually used the publicist for years and years and years and didn't really realize, to be perfectly honest, that a lot of that I could have probably been doing on my own. So I'm really thrilled today to talk to Winnie, because Winnie is kind of just like you and me, didn't have a traditional public relations background, but was able to get exposure in amazing outlets. And so I'm going to stop talking. I want to start hearing from Winnie. And I want everybody here to learn how you can do exactly what she's done. So, Winnie, I'd love for you to start out by just sharing, just brag on yourself a little bit. Just tell us some of the media publications where you have been able to get coverage. We'd love to hear that.
Yeah, for sure. So thank you for that. By day, I am a public relations rep, and also I manage my son's brand. And funny enough, working with my son and helping him build up his brand from the ground up is actually what led me into becoming a publicist. So I've had a chance to work with media such as Oprah's Magazine, CNN, local radio and TV stations, because local media matters just as much, and it helps with building that community. So I kind of got thrown into the fire. My degree is in corporate communications, but when I was in college, I did not even imagine becoming a public relations rep, but it's worked out perfectly.
Yeah. And one of the things that we talked about when we talked before, which I think is so important for people to understand, is that, when you roll up your sleeves and do this work and grind and send those pitches out, usually you're starting with those local television stations or radio or print publications. But oftentimes that leads to much
Yes.
larger publicity, because when we talked, I immediately dove into, like, how did you get on Good Morning America, and how did you get on
Yeah.
Steve Harvey and all that. And oftentimes that came from the smaller publications and the kind of
Absolutely.
local publicity.
Yeah, for sure. No, I that's exactly what happened. So, Sydney, my son, has been a guest on the Steve Harvey show when he had his TV show, and that was to date probably one of the most lucrative interviews that was like successful for his brand and for his image. But I told Dana that I actually did not pitch him to be on the Steve Harvey show. They found out about Sydney because of local media and because of other work that we had already done, and I think that there may have been a little sprinkle of Angel in there too, which I'll expound
Absolutely.
on later. But some of the, I guess one of the proudest wins that I have from local media is pitching Sydney to be a guest on NPR, St. Louis Public Radio, and the last that I checked and the last that I heard, they actually told us that in 2017, Sydney's interview with St. Louis Public Radio was the most popular, most listened to interview with the both of us, second to the solar eclipse in 2017. And I
Oh
was like,
my gosh.
like we're right up there, with the eclipse. So, but no, they saw the presentation, and my friends joke about me grooming, my son for media, but he listened. And I think that's also a huge point is, even as a client or if you're pitching yourself, you have to be prepared. And that presentation, even for a local station, if a national producer is watching that and they say, hey, I love how this person is on camera, we need to have them over on this other network, it sells itself.
Absolutely. And that's actually the way it happened for me as well. When my first appeared in a large spread in the Wall Street Journal, literally, I mean, I had done the interview, I don't know, a week or two prior, and my publicist had gotten me the interview. So I did the interview, they did the spread. Before I even read the article, I got a call from a CNN producer. I mean, literally, the CNN producer called me and said, hey, we want you to come on and talk about that article that's in the Wall Street Journal. And I was like, literally, I was like, I haven't even read it. And so she was like, well, read it and then call me back. And so I literally got off the phone with her and ran to go get the article, or maybe I pulled it up online, I can't remember, and read it. And then I called her back. So
Yes.
you really you can get a lot of benefit, even though it is a good bit of work. Really the reach is somewhat endless because it can get picked up in a range of different outlets. Now, for those people who were just completely unfamiliar, that may not have participated in the previous live, there was one that we did previously. So go to my YouTube channel if you missed that one. Break down what that pitching process looked like for you. Like, what did you actually do? Was it phone calls? Was it emails? How did you get the contact information? Just kind of for people who might be interested in starting to do some of this on their own, help them understand what that process looked like.
Yeah, for sure. So it was definitely trial by fire at first. I did not have anyone showing me the way, but I've always been a research. I just love research. I will be honest, and I'm probably like the millennial. I hate talking on the phone. I will if I have to, but I
I do
hate.
too, and I'm not even a millennial, but I think we all hate talking on the phone.
Yeah, at this point, no. So, but there's so much online available to us that I think, more than what we give credit to. So 9 times out of 10, if you see, like, even for example, if you're interested in having a segment with Dana, you can probably go to her website, and see, articles that she's written on before and topics that she's talked about. And then more than enough, a lot of times, I know it's called X now, but with Twitter, you can find a lot of journalists. A lot of times they'll have their email address in their bio ready for you.
Almost anybody to me is reachable via LinkedIn. And then all you've got to do,
Yes.
particularly if you're trying to work, obviously reach out to a major publication, read their bio in
Mm-hmm.
LinkedIn. And if you hit enough, how you pull up one person's information, then it says similar people or people also
Yeah.
follow over to the
Mm-hmm.
right. So
Yeah.
then you click on some of those names, and eventually somebody will have their email address in their bio. And then once you have the convention, is it first letter, last name? Is it last,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is? then you have the email convention for the entire publication. And so you can just, as long as you know their name, then you can
Yes.
email them directly.
And make it conversational. I would not, if I was, you know, pitching for a client that's, an expert in climate control, I don't think that that's, Dana's lane. So it's like, you have to do your research on what their expertise is, what their beat is. That's a term that a lot of journalists will use.
Absolutely.
And so I made a mistake early on where I did not do proper research, and I pitched a client who was in skincare, and I pitched them to a food journalist, which I didn't realize that was, I just didn't do my due diligence. I was too busy rushing. But the good thing is there are sometimes you'll find generous journalists that'll say, hey, sorry, this isn't my beat, but I think so-and-so will love this story. But that's because
Right.
even in my pitch, I made sure to humanize myself. Hey, how are you doing? I think that this is a story that you would love. Why would they love it? Because of XYZ. And just make it easy to read, make it relatable, and make sure to have a hook, because, if you have like a 1 or 2 liner that can really hook that person in, why does it matter? Why would they be interested?
Right. You've just dropped so many gems there. So I want to call a timeout just so that we cover those sufficiently. One, don't make the mistake of just blindly sending the pitch to everyone without customizing, tailoring, doing your research. For me, when I was a Forbes contributor, for example, that I think was a major mistake a lot of people made. They would pitch me food articles, they would pitch me pet articles. I mean, and also sometimes you could tell what would happen is I would happen to write an article that related to a pet, but that wasn't my beat. That wasn't my focus area. It just happened to be in that one particular article. And then all of a sudden I got deluged with articles. I remember I was writing about a veterinary practice during COVID. And some of the it was really like a small business story about some of the innovative things that they did during the shutdown in New York City when it was, really, really bad at the beginning of COVID. And so it really was an entrepreneurship story, but just because it happened to be a veterinary practice, then all of a sudden I just started getting inundated with these pet related pitches. And so that really, really was not my lane. And so I've had that happen. So absolutely, you don't want to make that mistake. So you really, really want to customize. It's better to send 5 targeted pitches to the right people than to send 50 to the wrong people. So really, really take the time to do that.
I totally agree. And you just made me think of something. I may be one of few publicists that don't like this, and hopefully it's okay that I'm sharing this as far as like PR code. But I don't like mass emailing, like as far as like, putting all journalists in one email thread. And, I don't care if it's BCC, everyone, it won't apply to everyone. Every pitch won't apply to everyone. And I think if you have obviously, different channels of, okay, these are my journalists that focus on entrepreneurship stories, then there may be a way to go about that. But that's a pet peeve of mine.
No, that should almost go without saying. I mean, these should be one-on-one targeted emails. You want to think about quality over quantity. And certainly that's a huge buzzkill, a huge turnoff, is to be on the receiving end of a mass email, an email, dear journalist, with my name spelled wrong, any of that. You want it to be customized and you want it to be one-on-one. One of the other things that you mentioned, I believe you mentioned this, I wanted to pick up on this as well. In the beginning of the pitch, one, you want to have a hook. We talked about that during the last session. Something that really kind of grabs their attention, but also maybe give them an indication that you've read their work. Like many of my pitches would start off with, hey, I really appreciated this last article that you wrote about XYZ, just some sort of indication. You don't have to like slather it on super thick because that can be off-putting, but just some indication that you've read their work. And guess what? Maybe reach out to them before you want to pitch them, particularly if it is social media or Twitter. Maybe start commenting when they're writing an article and they're posting it on Twitter. Start commenting on their articles, reading them, getting familiar with their work, but kind of just getting into their LinkedIn ecosystem so that, it always is a little off-putting when the first time someone's reaching out to you, they want something.
Yeah.
So don't let it be that situation. Go ahead and reach out to them, get to know them, comment on their work, develop some level of social media rapport before you're actually pitching them. What's been your experience with that?
Yeah, no, I was you just made me think that I've made some great like social media connections. You would think that we've met in person and because when you build that rapport and you build that trust, a lot of times you won't have to pitch as much because you'll be in their Rolodex, so they'll say, "Oh, I know, Winnie has this client that is in African American literacy and can give advice to that. I need a story on that, from a different perspective. Let me reach out to her." So it's relationships will really take you far, but you have to be careful about how you treat people. And you don't it's a transactional industry, we know that already, but you don't want it to feel transactional.
And now that you've said that, it reminds me of something else. Let me just share a little bit about my own journey. We need to remember sometimes we don't think of journalists as like real people, and we don't think about it from their perspective in terms of they have a beat, they have a pipeline, they have a certain amount of workload, a certain amount of articles that they need to get through, they have an editorial commitment. And so the more you can make their job easier, the more likely they are to
Yep.
reach out to you. So for example, when you talked about building that relationship, this woman who first wrote this one spread in Wall Street Journal, this was back in 2012. Okay, this is how far back this is, 2012. Because I had a really positive interaction with her, because when she would email me, I would kind of drop everything and just respond back to her, follow up as needed. She probably, I would say, over several years, she probably reached out to me maybe 8 to 10 times
Mm.
to ask me to be a source for different articles. And that, I mean, was huge. So it's like we
Yeah.
did the work up front to establish the connection, to get the interview. But then after that point, I had enough of a rapport with her
Yeah.
so that she kept me in mind. And that's another thing that I did. I always kind of kept her apprised. Like if you have a one sheet or a PowerPoint slide or something that just highlights, maybe it has your bio on it and it has a bullet list. And these are the topics where I would be a very credible source. And so she had that. You want them to have that in their mental Rolodex so that when they're writing another article 3 months from now or 3 years from now, and they need a source, trust me, I've been in
Mhm.
situations so many times. I'm writing this article. Oh, I need a good source. I don't want just anybody. I mean, I want a great, amazing source. If they already have you in mind, they're going to reach out to you. They're not
Yeah.
necessarily going to wait for you to pitch them. They will go ahead and reach out to you. I've done it myself many, many, many times.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You've made me think of so many things, but like definitely even my mom actually is a media professional and I tried to rebel against it. So I tried so many things in high school. I did like culinary arts, all these things to get away from communications, but obviously it's in my blood. But I say that to say that even she told me early on, like, Winnie, if you can make that reporter's job easier, you'll have a best friend for life. So
Absolutely.
you make sure that you provide professional photos, even if you just have one good headshot. And if that headshot will apply for you for a year, then use that same one. It'll offer some consistency.
Right.
But like have photos available, have actionable shots. So if you are trying to get, media coverage for, if you're hosting a food drive, if it's something that you've done before and you have photos from that, even if they're camera photos, that's quality now, but that helps.
And I keep wanting, I'm going to go back to the story because I know that we started, but we didn't finish. But there's so many great, amazing gems that I want people to take away. So I'm going to leave with this last one before we circle back to the story to close that loop. But another mistake is just not having that marketing collateral ready. There were
Yeah.
many times when I was writing an article and I would say they would talk about their accomplishments and I would ask them for either certain data or statistics or a picture that relates to it. If you have a compelling infographic, whatever it is, have some compelling visuals that accompany either your work, your business, your book, A book is an obvious one. You need to have great graphics that relate to that. So you want to have those things ready, because when they ask you for it, you don't want to, oh, I need another week. I need another, 2 weeks. By then, they'll just move on to a different source. So
Yep.
make sure you have your marketing collateral ready to go so that when they ask you for that, you can send it off and it's no big deal. And it also makes you, appear so much more prepared. Because I will
Absolutely.
say, for me, if I'm asking you for a bio, I'm asking you for a headshot, and it seems like that's a new concept, or you're going to need a week to develop. Now I'm starting to worry about your credibility, like,
Yeah.
what's going on here. So you want to be sure, be super tight on your marketing collateral. So with that, let's go back to the story again, because I want to be really clear for people who aren't as familiar. So this was a local television network that you were pitching, the original story you were telling us?
Oh, yes, it was NPR radio,
Okay.
but St. Louis Public Radio.
Okay, awesome. So it was radio. So tell us, just kind of walk us through what you sent to them, how they responded, didn't respond, kind of what that back and forth was like until you actually appeared on the program.
Yeah, for sure. So I was familiar, with one of the hosts with their beat. So they're more so in educational stories. And because at the time I was pitching my son's book club, I know that what his book club offers is a non-traditional, asset to literacy for education. And so I essentially just said, hey, I hope all is well. I have this great story. I'm proud to say, that he's my son, but he has been building, XYZ, and this is the amount of impact that he's made. And even at that time, it was small, but it was still something. Like, you could tell that there was passion, that this was an impactful story, and this was something that we were pushing forward. And so, and we're in we were in St. Louis at the time. So I sent, what it was, why it mattered for this particular segment on the show. I also created in Canva, I created him a press kit. So essentially just like a one sheeter of, a short bio, his mission, for his business. On the one sheeter, there were a couple headshots available, but then I also attached those separately in case they wanted to use them, and then, our social media outlets, contact information, all of that. So essentially I gave them all of the things that they would need that you mentioned already: bio, headshots, the
That's
why. Yeah.
Right. And that hits on another mistake. It's just sending like a little bit of information. You haven't given me kind of everything that I need. Sometimes people will follow up with questions, but most
Mhm.
of the time they'll just move on to the next one. So if you're going to take the time to send the pitch, go ahead and send a full pitch and have like the bio and the headshots and just a well thought through pitch.
Yeah.
Now, did you have was this like a completely cold pitch, meaning you didn't know anyone there or have anyone refer you or anything like that?
I would say it was pretty cold. I mean, I will be honest that my mom had a relationship with one of the reporters there, but I'm
Okay.
very much I want to get it myself type of girl.
Hmm.
So I did not even tell my mom that I was pitching.
Okay, so it was
Yeah.
cold, even though, and that's why I wanted to ask, because sometimes people feel like, oh, people only get that publicity because they know people. And certainly, if you know someone, use that
Use it.
relationship. We're
Yeah,
not saying
yeah,
that at all.
yeah.
Use whatever relationships you have. But
Be
the
better than me.
Yes, but the message we want to get across is don't deny yourself if you don't have those relationships. You can cold pitch a journalist, unless they've explicitly said, "Don't send me pitches," then
Right.
don't send them pitches.
Yeah,
But
and there's gonna be a lot of no's too. There's
yes,
I've gotten so many no's before I finally got a yes for different outlets. So yes, I agree. A one sheet is a tremendous asset. I just saw that on the screen. But yeah, no, it's don't let what is it? A delay is not a denial. So
that is such an important point, and I'm going to
yeah.
want you to talk about that a little bit more, because one of the things that I saw over and over when I was a contributor is people would send me a pitch, and then maybe like a week later or something, they were like indignant that I hadn't responded to
Mhm.
their pitch, or they were, wanting feedback on, how to change it. And I, in a perfect world, I absolutely am all with you. But they don't understand how this process works. That we literally are getting an email in our inbox like every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So you need to expect a no. You
Yeah.
need to expect a no response. That's the most common one, that you're not going to get a
No
response.
response. Yeah.
Don't get yourself all in a tizzy because they didn't respond to you. That's normal, okay?
Yeah.
But you
Yeah.
need to keep moving, whether it's circling back with them later or pitching a different person. But you cannot get stuck in the fact that somebody did not respond to you. If you do that, you're not going to be terribly successful. Your thoughts
Yeah.
on that and your experience?
Yeah, for sure. I think going back to one of the social media outlets that you mentioned, LinkedIn is great for that because the thing is, let's say hypothetically, if I were to pitch a story to you and you didn't get back to me for whatever reason, which is fine, and then I'm continuing to do the work. You know, if I'm not a publicist and I'm just working for myself, my business, and I'm continuing to do the work and I'm showcasing that work on LinkedIn, you can then see it and say, oh wait, hey, I know she's been trying to reach me and I love what I'm seeing, what she's doing. Let me circle back and get a story. You know, like do the work. You know, I know it sounds cliche, but if people see that you're actively pushing forward, you know, with your mission despite, you know, having media, because I think that's one thing that helped, you know, even with me working with my son's brand is that we had no media the first like 5 months. We weren't even trying. We just wanted to build something that was sustained.
Wow.
And so,
Okay.
you know, we built this for 5 months without no local. We actually got national media before we got local, which circle back, it's a whole thing. But like someone picked up on our story nationally, and then that's what like propelled me to go after local media because I could show them, hey, we've been highlighted with
Wow.
now
So
this
you
or that.
use the national press to get more local exposure.
Yep.
Wow. And how do you think you got the national press?
I think it was power of social media, honestly, because I was just, you know, even if there were some posts that I would make for his book club, and if it only got 20 likes, that didn't mean that I needed to quit. You know, we just keep
Right.
pushing what we're doing. And then those same posts that only got 20 likes, you know, someone, you know, it grabbed the attention of someone. To this day, I couldn't tell you who, but I just remember being at work and I got a notification from Instagram that we were tagged on the Huffington Post. And I'm like, what? You know, I didn't
Right.
do that. And when I went to the website, there was my son's face on the Huffington Post. And I'm like, oh my gosh, but they used those same photos that only got 20 likes as their images, you know, to
Right.
promote his book club. So I was able that did position us in a, you know, in a favorable form, obviously, to get some local media, but local media, it can be just as hard as national sometimes.
Right, right. And I mean, that's just such an amazing story, but it really kind of goes back to my mantra. My mantra that I use for my own business is attract, don't sell.
Mm,
And it's just the power of attraction. If you're out there, you are doing your thing, people just start seeing, wow, she's here, she's doing this, that's great. Then they come to you. And that has been what's worked for me so well. And, you know, I'm not going to lie, if you're starting out, you probably have to attract and sell. It's probably a both and. But that attraction piece is just so important. I left
yeah.
this comment up because I just wanted to read it out. I thought it was so amazing. Rejection is part of the process. Don't take it personally. Most of the time, no just means not right now. Create a new story and keep pitching. Thank you so much for that. You absolutely have to have that mentality if you're going to be successful.
You know, you just made me think about something.
Hmm.
If it's okay, because I wanted to
Yeah, go
share.
ahead and then we'll get to this question. Yeah.
Yeah. So even in the frame of attracting and those, you know, like sometimes you have to put in a little bit more grind and more work, and it can attract the right outlet. So remember when I was telling you about how Sydney spoke at Morehouse?
Right, right.
So, I'll make it really brief, but when my son was 11 years old, someone reached out to me and they asked if he could be, or actually he was 10 years old. And this was very early on. We had probably only been operating Books and Bros for a few months. Someone reached out and said, hey, I would love for him to speak at Morehouse later this year. And this was a organizer not affiliated with Morehouse at all. But you know, and I said, yeah, obviously, sure. And we were living in St. Louis at the time. I knew in my head that I wanted to move to Atlanta, and I just knew I would be living in Atlanta at the time. Obviously, that did not happen back then, and this is a mistake that I made, is that I did not ask, and I didn't know any better, but I did not ask if they had a budget to pay him, like a speaker's fee or cover travel. Like I literally just said yes, and that was it. And obviously, they're not going to offer it if I don't ask. So once I realized that we needed to travel, and I circled back and I said, "Hey, do you have a budget to help?" And it was too late at that point. So I either had a choice to pull him out, or make the sacrifice and just go for it. And I was a
But it was
young,
a lessons learned, right? And
yes,
that's what I
absolutely.
want to leave people with. Certainly, if you have expenses, those should absolutely be covered, no question whatsoever.
Oh yeah,
So you
now,
certainly
yeah.
want to ask those questions. So sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. I know this is a great
No,
story.
no, it's okay. Now he gets paid his fee and he gets his own hotel room aside from the family,
Absolutely.
and travel covered. But the beauty in this story is that I spent like whatever last money I had left over on our plane tickets. We slept at a friend's house, slept on the couch in Atlanta. He did his speaking engagement at Morehouse and he did a phenomenal job. He was the youngest one there. He was 10 years old at the time. And things were so tight financially that and it's crazy like saying this out loud now, but we ate dinner at the Morehouse Cafe. Like after he was
Mm,
done, we
mm,
walked over to the cafe and we ate, and then we were going to go back to my friend's house. And so, as we're paying for the food, the cashier, she looks at my son and he's so little and she's like, "What are you doing here?" And he
mhm,
was like, "Oh, I just did a speaking engagement on entrepreneurship." And she was like, "What?" And so he told her he had his pitch. He had his one hook that he learned from mom.
mhm.
And
His
he
elevator pitch.
his elevator pitch, yes. And he
Right.
he told it to her as far as about Books and Bros. And she said, "Oh my God, you know who needs to know about you? Steve Harvey." And we just laughed it off, sat down, ate our food, and I kid you not, we got back to my friend's apartment. I literally pulled open my laptop to, look at like crowdfunding ideas because we needed funding. And before I could even start a campaign, I got a text message from a producer and they said, "Hey, I'm a producer with the Steve Harvey Show. I got your information from so and so. Would you be able to come to LA in 2 weeks?" And I was like, "What?" So, but like, somehow, I don't know. I always wonder if that cashier knew somebody who knew somebody because you never know with Atlanta. But
Right.
the beauty in all of that is that I made the sacrifice. Sometimes you may not get paid for your first speaking engagement or, your first national one. Sometimes you do have to put in a little grit to show that you're willing to go there. And honestly, optics are a lot of, PR is a lot of optics. So I'm
Sure.
pretty sure, when on the outside looking in, people see him speaking at Morehouse and they're like, "Oh my gosh, we need to get this kid." Meanwhile, they don't even know the sacrifice on the back end. So I wanted to share that, especially in this season. I know, inflation is
Hard.
inflating and it's
Right.
really hard. And there are a lot of sacrifices that people are making, but I don't want you to think that those sacrifices are going unnoticed. I just, I want to offer some encouragement that way.
Yeah, and as Lisa says, a key point here is to always be nice. And
Yes.
and in my it's so hard because I want to say because you never know what it could lead to or who might know somebody. But you need to be nice just to be nice, okay?
Yeah.
Just to be a
Yeah.
decent person. But I
Yeah.
think in that there's a spiritual component of reciprocity that
Mhm.
those good things will happen and doors will open up. At least that's my mindset and that's my
Mhm.
philosophy. And just tell us about what you said about Steve. Was it Steve who said it? You're about to blow up. Tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about that when you were on the Steve Harvey show.
Yeah, so when Sydney was on the Steve Harvey show, he literally you can find if you Google Sydney Keys the third Steve Harvey, you'll see the YouTube video. But he literally looked at Sydney and he's like, "How many boys have you served so far?" And I think at the time it was like 100, boys maybe. And he said, "Oh, well, after this, you about to blow up." And literally it got to the point to where we had to put a cap on how many kids, that we could enroll in the program because I was getting emails, like back to back to back. And it was great.
So I want to, and I know we're going to wrap in a few minutes, but Kit, I so agree with you. Please just lead with kindness always. I want to go to Lisa's question. And if you have more questions, please go ahead and drop them in the chat or in the comment field because we're probably going to wrap in the next 10 minutes or so. But Winnie, I'd love to go to this question. And then on the other side of that, and maybe one more, a couple other ones if we get some other questions in. I would love to hear you either talk about how the O Magazine event happened or CNN Heroes, whichever of those. And I don't think I know either one, but whichever one you think might be more helpful for the group here. But Lisa, I think, asked a great question. In terms of following up, is there a recommended time frame or number of times one does not want to potentially reach out too much? And I think I put this up here because I really love this question, and it shows that, to me, you have the absolute right mindset, because you're trying to find that right balance between not giving up too soon and being somewhat persistent, but then not being a nag, not being somebody that's going to get blocked because, oh my God, it's her again with the exact same pitch. So I have some thoughts on it, but I'd love to first hear, what your thoughts are, what guidance you would suggest for people.
Yeah, I think in my experience, I try not to max, honestly, 2. If I feel like I've reached out twice and I haven't heard anything back, it may not necessarily be about the number of times, but maybe how I'm pitching. So maybe there's something else going on, during this time, that could be a little bit more relatable. So maybe my pitch at the time isn't as relatable as I think that it is, and I just need to go back and recreate a new pitch, just pivot a little bit, so something that may have worked for Black History Month may need to be, repositioned in a different light for the spring or, upcoming in summer, so it may be less of number of times and how you're crafting your pitch.
I love that advice, and I would absolutely concur with that. I think most people will agree that, hey, one follow-up is fine. It's absolutely fine. Now, it doesn't need to be one day later. It doesn't need to be the next day.
No.
But maybe, a week, 2 weeks, maybe following up after a week or 2 weeks is fine. Once you get to that third follow-up, now I think you're kind of getting into the part where you might want to consider pulling back. So one follow-up I think is absolutely fine. After you've done one follow-up, I would really think about retooling it or maybe waiting for a different season. So I love exactly what you said. Maybe hold on it until Black History Month or until back to school season or until Mother's Day, and then tailor the pitch for Mother's Day or tailor the pitch, or maybe a news event happens. Something happens in the news that's very newsworthy, and then tailor the hook of your pitch. The meat of it might essentially be the same, but you want to tailor the hook to address that very newsworthy event that just happened.
Yeah.
So that, to me, is the best advice. But the mistake that I think that Lisa's referring to that people will make is they'll have the exact same pitch and just keep sending it over and over and over and over and over. It's like, if I wasn't interested in it time number 5, I'm not going to be interested in time number 17.
Yeah, it's probably worse now at time number 5.
Yeah, exactly. and you damage the relationship, and it's just not worth it. So any other questions, go ahead and drop those in the chat. So Winnie, just share with us, how about the O Magazine or the CNN Heroes? Pick one and let us know how that came about.
Yeah, so I think I would like to actually go with the CNN Heroes moment, because that was actually one that I did not pitch for. So they were familiar with Sydney actually because of the NPR, the St. Louis Public Radio story.
And again, the connection. You pitched for the NPR, knocked it out of the park, and then that led to the CNN Heroes. So I love that.
Yeah. So they reached out, and it was interesting because they reached out in that same season it was like shortly after I agreed for Sydney to be on Steve Harvey. Literally a week later, someone from CNN reached out to have us go to New York. So we went from LA to New York in like the same week, which was, how do we pitch for unsure budget? Okay, I'll get to that. But I want to highlight the CNN Heroes moment because even though I didn't pitch for it, I was able to maximize that relationship for another opportunity in the future. So for CNN Hero, Sydney essentially was awarded as a CNN hero. They came actually to St. Louis to showcase our meetups and our events. So that's another part of like, it's not just about getting the publicity. You literally have to be prepared. So that's just like, if I'm pitching for him to have this segment, but then we're not actually having book club meetups. Like, you have to actually be doing what you're saying that you want publicity for. And we had the space, we had to have clearance, we had to have, media releases for all of the people, not even just kids, but everyone in that space, to be protected. And when we went through that filming process, it was great. We flew to New York and had a great time there. But fast forward in 2020, when George Floyd was killed, they wanted the perspective of young people to talk about it. And they remembered that, Sidney, had this movement that he's doing with young Black boys. And so I saw that they started like having people post testimonials on their social media. And when I reached out and I said, hey, just so you know, we are still operating. Even though we're in a pandemic, we're able to still ship out the boxes without having in-person meetups. They remembered him and they said, yes, we would absolutely love to. And so he was able to have another segment virtually with CNN because of that.
And I think that's a mistake that people make as well. It's a one and done. They get some exposure, and they're excited for that, but then they kind of forget it. They don't nurture that relationship. They
Right.
don't reach back out when a news
Yeah.
event happens and remind them of their relevance, remind them of their credibility, remind them that I'm a thought leader in
Yeah.
this space and I'd be happy to offer some thought leadership to your readers.
Yeah.
So it's not just a one and done. Maybe it's something you want to put on your calendar quarterly to go back out to refresh those connections. Ask them what's coming up on, hey, what's on your editorial calendar? What type of sources are you interested in over the next several months? Maybe remind them of the heritage months that are coming up. I always used to love that when people would send me pitches and say, this would be very timely for, and then they
Yes.
would remind me what's coming up in 3 months, what some of those special days are or months are, and make that connection. Because sure, in 3 months, I am going to need that content, but I may not be thinking about it 3 months in advance. And so for me, that was very, very helpful. So
Yeah.
we've got a couple questions here, and I'm not sure I fully understand this one. So she's asking, how do we pitch when we are unsure of the budget? So let me take it a little bit, and then Winnie, you can chime in. I don't think that typically money should be involved. So for example, if you're pitching a print publication, there should be no budget that's relevant. You're just pitching yourself, your book, your service, your business, for coverage in that particular publication. And you don't want to say, hey, I want you to cover my book. You need to be more nuanced. You need to be focused on providing value for the readers of that particular publication. And I go through that in a ton of detail on the previous LinkedIn Live that we did. So check that one out, because it really goes through how the outline of the pitch and the hook and how you want to word that. Now, some of what Winnie's talking about involve like flying around and doing media, television spots, and maybe radio spots. I would assume now there's a lot more that's virtual. So again, I don't think a budget would be required. But I would think, and again, we said that was a mistake, was to spend your own money doing that. And I know that might be a judgment call for some people, but it's just me personally. If I were going to do that, I would expect at a minimum to have those expenses covered. But Winnie, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say the same. If we're understanding this the same, like, let's just say hypothetically, if you do, have someone reach out and they say, hey, we want you on this TV show in New York City, can you be here in 2 weeks? Then your question can be, yes, I would be interested. Can you tell me what, like, it's their budget. It's not necessarily your budget that you have to, express, but what budget do they have? So, and typically they'll share
Right.
that all at once. They'll say, we can cover, flight, hotel, and sometimes even like a food allowance or whatever, if you're not getting paid an actual speaker's fee. And I know a lot of times it's not common to get paid like a speaker's fee or anything like that for TV or for media, but definitely having at very minimum, the hotel and flight covered.
Right. You don't want to go backwards. And we'll save that for another talk, another LinkedIn Live, because I've been a paid speaker for 20 years, and that's just a whole nother topic about how to get paid for speaking events. But that's really a different situation than what we're talking about here. Here you're getting that media coverage, which can really be very helpful and beneficial for your business. So you're not necessarily expecting payment, but you don't want to be going backwards. You don't want to be going in the hole. You don't want to necessarily be flying across the country and having to incur those expenses yourself. And now with technology, that really should not be the case at all. So a couple other questions here, and then we're going to wrap. Are they open to hearing directly from the founder owner and not a formal PR rep on behalf of the company when you're a small biz? I love this question, because this is really why I created, actually I haven't mentioned it, but I created a short course, Pitching Yourself Without a Publicist, and Winnie has an ebook as well. We're going to drop the links for both of those before we wrap. So this is my answer: yes and no. There are some obviously there are thousands of journalists, so we can't speak for every outlet, every journalist. Certainly larger publications or larger media organizations are probably more used to dealing with publicists and PR agents, etc. That's much more common. But what we're trying to say here today is everybody doesn't have that access. Everyone, to be quite honest, can't afford a publicist. That doesn't mean that you still can't pitch yourself directly. There's some people who will be open to it. There might be some people who frankly aren't as open to it. Don't worry about those people, okay? Worry about the people who are open to it. You just keep knocking on those doors. And let me also tell you, as someone who did have a writing commitment with a very well-known publication on a regular basis, if your story, for example, is a rags to riches, like how you built this business, or like Winnie's talking about her son at age 10 is starting this Books and Bros, focusing on young Black men, those types of stories, I would rather get the pitch from the person themselves. Why do I want some PR agent in the middle telling me about their rags to riches story? I remember I wrote an article one time about a guy who grew up in a Black man who grew up in a really rough area, and he was selling drugs, to be perfectly candid. And he went from that was kind of a light bulb moment for him, when he almost got busted selling drugs. And then he ended up becoming like a brilliant guy, getting amazing number of patents. He worked for these amazing companies, was really a technical genius, wrote all these patents. And so when I was talking to him, I wanted to hear from him. I didn't want to hear the publicist version of how the drug deal went bad. I wanted to hear it directly from him. It is so much more compelling. So if you have a story that has an emotional component, or if it's about your personal business, or why you wrote the book, you were moved to write this book, personally, I think that can be an advantage, a huge advantage, when you can directly speak to your own story. Winnie, your thoughts on that?
No, I agree. And I see it from two lenses, obviously, as a publicist. But I think first, I want to make sure to say, when we started Books and Bros and when we got a lot of these great opportunities, I did not realize that I was operating as my son's publicist. We did not have one, so I just thought initially that I was being a great mom and protecting my child, and making sure that the brand awareness was consistent. So, I didn't realize that there were some times where, let's say if there was an outlet and they said, 10-year-old boy starts book club only for Black boys. That's not what Books and Bros is. It's for all boys to amplify African American literature. So then I would go back to that reporter and I would say, hey, would you mind tweaking this, because that's a bit miscommunication on behalf of his brand. So that's like the role of a publicist, is kind of advocate for you. But as far as like telling your story, we told our own story directly to the reporters. I think that a publicist can come in when it becomes a little bit too overwhelming and too much for you to handle. When you do start to receive a lot more requests and demands than pitches that you're pushing out, then that's when you can reel in a publicist and say, hey, I need some assistance. I need a buffer. I need someone, to assist me in this. Hopefully that helps.
I love that story. So we're going to answer this quickly, and then we're going to wrap by Winnie, you sharing where they can reach you, share more about your ebook, and thank everybody for being here. So this last question, is it okay to reach out to multiple contacts at one publication at the same time? Yes, absolutely. I would not say, okay, for Forbes, I have this one contact. For the Wall Street Journal, I'm going to reach out to one person. So you need to cast a wide net. Now, again, you still might want to do your research and be somewhat strategic and careful about how you do that. But for each publication, you're probably going to want to reach out to a range of journalists. Now, if someone is interested and they're actually in the process of writing a story, then I would just focus on that journalist. I wouldn't have multiple stories being written at the same time at the same publication. But initially, I would say absolutely, you're going to need to reach out to more than one contact.
Yeah.
So with that, thank you, Winnie, so much. Please share how people can reach you, and I'm going to try to pull up this link to your ebook and tell them a little bit about your ebook.
Yeah, well, thank you first for having me. I'm very honored. Dana has written an amazing story about my son, and it was just it embodied our entire journey. So I know I've thanked you before. I want to thank you again, not just because of the platform, but because of how you were able to just so eloquently tell our story.
You're talking about the one in Forbes, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you. Y'all were
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. But no, so you can reach me here on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active here. My email is contact@bookedenterprise.com. I can put that in the chat. And thank you. My Be Your Own Publicist guide is what Dana has been giving some hints to. So I actually created this in light of the holidays, specifically for entrepreneurs and business owners, because, you know, like I said before, we're in an economy of inflation right now, and you can't always afford to pay, you know, a publicist's salary. So this is a 5-page guidebook that includes a template for pitches. So you're essentially using a pitch that I've used time and time again successfully. So I've created a template for that. There's also a media kit template. So we talked about having either that one pager or a full out spread, you know, portfolio to really amplify your work. There's a template for that inside, as well as some industry favorite, you know, sources, kind of like Help a Reporter Out, Quoted. Those are some spaces where publicists operate and where you can find direct contacts for journalists. So it's all in that ebook on the website that's in the chat.
And I just thank you so much for being here. And hope you have a wonderful holiday season. And thank everyone for being here today. We're going to take January off, and we will be back on the first Thursday in February, which I think is February 2nd. So go ahead and mark that on your calendar. This time, we're going to be talking about how to land a book deal. If you've always wanted to write a book and get published, but wasn't quite sure how that process works, well, we're going to uncover the gems, and we're going to be talking about how to land a book deal. But thank you again, Winnie. It was amazing.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to connect with whoever wants to connect. So I will
Yeah,
see
please follow
you.
her and connect with her. Reach out to her on LinkedIn. And we'll see you next time. Bye bye, everyone.
Bye.